They picked me up, and I'm hopping on one leg, and I saw Major Griffin, Major Gray, Major Kennedy, and Regi Abdel Fattah were all killed by the same bomber that didn't kill me.
Florent Groberg is a retired U.S. Army captain who fought in Afghanistan and was severely injured attempting to thwart a suicide bomber. For his actions, he received the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for military valor.
Everything that we have in this nation is because of men and women who put their lives on the line and didn't come home, and their families have to live with the consequences of that.
I spoke with Captain Groberg on a range of topics, from DeepSeek AI and swarming drones to the war in Ukraine and the Chinese Communist threat.
When I first heard about DeepSeek and its battle with OpenAI, I saw it as an opportunity for the Chinese government to have free access to all of our data as they see fit. The Chinese have been developing the majority of the world's small drones. They're cheap, they're effective, so it really has changed the landscape of warfare.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Florent Groberg, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me. Excited.
You've been recently writing about DeepSeek. It's available basically to any American to be used in whatever way. Why is this a problem?
I'd say very important topic, in my personal opinion, when it comes down to national security. When I first heard about DeepSeek and its battle with OpenAI, the concept of doing it a lot cheaper, just as well in regards to accuracy, if not better, and that a lot of people here in the U.S. had access to it. All you had to do was just download it. It scared me. Personally, it scared me. My first thought is, why would anyone here in the United States download this application? Specifically because it's owned by a Chinese company. And my second thought was, what does it do that's much better than ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, the other applications that would entice you to download this one and put your property, your IP, your personal private information at risk? And then I started to peel the onion back and realize people don't know. They just think that this is a new application that's available for them for cheap, for free, and it's better than the rest because it's a lot cheaper and you can do things faster, whatever the story was sold to them on the media, and they're going to use it. What they forget, it's a Chinese company that has to abide by the 2017 Chinese international law in terms of regulations for companies to have to provide their data to the Chinese government. So in essence, I saw it as an opportunity for the Chinese government to have free access to all of our data as they see fit, because people are utilizing it to do everything, from asking normal questions to planning their day, to financial questions, to doing their taxes, to potentially putting the IP of their own businesses and products that they're developing to get a better understanding or maybe a competitive advantage. And all this is now being just transferred over at the mercy of whatever the Chinese government wants to make out of it.
The thing that was really astonishing to me was this hype that was created. Look, they did it so cheap, it was so good, and they did it so cheap, without really any evidence provided.
No evidence, no facts. We don't even know where the chips come from. Do they come from NVIDIA or not? We had no data. There was actually no proof of what they were claiming they were able to do. Finally, now we've had the ability to sort of take a deeper look into it, and it's nothing special. It's not better than anything else out there already on the market. They just can do it at a fifth or an eighth the cost, supposedly. I have a question in regards to this. How much is the Chinese government actually paying for that? Well, what's the government's involvement in terms of the financials to make this company go forward? Does that change the math there? Maybe, maybe not. I have no idea. These are questions we should be asking ourselves. But instead, I think a lot of us just jump right to the conclusion. Cheaper, better, faster. We really need to start pointing the fingers at OpenAI. What are you doing? NVIDIA, what are you doing? And things like that.
What is the full nature then of the China threat, and when did you first become aware of this?
Well, I've served in the military. I've served in the intelligence services for a little bit of time. I am a de facto, not well-versed historian. I'm also paying attention to what's going on around the world. And look, the Chinese have been doing, they made a commitment in 1949, a 100-year commitment, to really become the sole world power when it comes to economics, military, technology, and they're working really hard at that mission. And that mission requires, passing the United States on many different facets. And so to do so, you need to invest, you need to capture, and you need to lead. It's a massive threat to our way of life, United States specifically, the free world in essence. And so when I see the opposition taking advantage potentially of our own way of life and the way we decide, the freedom of press, freedom of speech, our ability to utilize these type of platforms with no consequences in extent versus the way they operate, it worries me a little bit, because I'm also understanding that they're trying to become, trying to pass us, and we're giving them a free pass. And they're making massive investments on the technological side. You've seen our military grow. They're capturing a lot of territories around the world, in Africa, South America, Europe. They're bailing out Russia. And so that worries me a little bit for the safety of national security.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess the unspoken thing is that it is a totalitarian dictatorship after all. I recently, someone was basically commenting that they perceive America as being responsible for the opium war and treat Americans as such. We're talking about the fentanyl crisis and a lot of the precursors and even actual fentanyl basically being facilitated by the Chinese regime. My comment in response was, yeah, but that's true, but even more important is that they treat their own people worse than they treat the people responsible for the opium wars.
Yeah, and listen, to me, when it comes down to the opium world, there's a lot of responsible parties. We need to figure out a way to stop it. I've lost, unfortunately, friends recently that I served with, unfortunately, who were using. And they had, one of them specifically was using a different drug that was laced with fentanyl and passed away. He was struggling. He was a medic, a great kid, but it's a problem that we really need to fix. And there is responsibility here in our own country. Obviously, there's a heck of a responsibility over there. This is one of those situations where I believe this should not be a competition. This should be a partnership. That it benefits all parties for it.
Well, Florent, just one quick sec. We're going to take a break, and folks, we'll be right back. And we're back with Medal of Honor recipient Florent Groberg. I think the only way that the Chinese regime can be invited to, or encouraged to actually stop the flow of fentanyl, is if there's some kind of leverage that can be used that will cause them more pain than the, actual military benefit they get out of letting the fentanyl flow and facilitating the fentanyl flow. What are your thoughts?
In a perfect world, I will say this: I would love for to be no war. I've been at war. I've seen how horrible it is. The idea and the concept of having to take someone else's life, and more importantly, is your friends that don't get to come home, and the families that have to deal with the consequences on both sides. War is the worst potential outcome out there. But I'd love to have a partnership with everybody. I'd love to be able to have dinner with Chinese counterpart, Russian counterpart, French counterpart, British counterpart, and all us be peaceful and talking about how can we better this earth and do better things to support each other's economies and communities. But unfortunately, it's from my understanding and my personal experiences, we face too many individuals who don't think that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think many would argue that, let's say, some less benevolent forces took advantage of exactly the kind of sentiments and the kind of desires that you just described, which of course many Americans share. Of course, you did serve in the military. You received the Medal of Honor. And I think we should talk about that and how that happened.
I did. I served in the Army. I joined in 2008, infantryman. I joined at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was stationed in Colorado Springs, Fort Carson. 2 tours to Afghanistan, one in 2009 and 2010 as a platoon leader in the Kunar province. Led a very specific team of 24 Americans in the remote parts of eastern Afghanistan. Learned a lot about being a man and a leader, but also a follower. I learned a lot about myself in those mountains. Faced some pretty difficult enemies, but most importantly, I was surrounded by some of the best people I've ever met in my life. Second tour, 2012, back in Afghanistan. I was running the Specialized Security D team for the brigade commander, now who is the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. And we were about 6-7 months into the deployment. We were targeted by a suicide bomber in Asadabad, again, eastern Afghanistan again. My job was to lead that security team. Luckily, I was close enough to the suicide bomber. I saw a suicide bomber come out of a structure after they created diversion with motorcycles. I couldn't see a weapon on him. I saw him as a threat, couldn't confirm he was a threat, so I couldn't engage him with my rifle or my service weapon. So I did my own made-up escalation of force, which was run at him, say a lot of words at him, hopefully he responds, confirm that he's a bad guy, and if he's a bad guy, do your job. And so I ran at him, I hit him, I grabbed him, hit him, confirmed he was wearing a suicide vest. And the only thing I could think of at that moment was I got to get him away from the team as quickly and as far away as possible. I was followed by one of my guys, Sergeant Mahoney. So I threw him, and Mahoney was right behind me, just ready to roll. And he landed on the ground, detonated. I don't know how, call it grace of God, luck, whatever you want, whatever you want to believe. But I lived. I was thrown 30 feet. My foot was facing me. I had blood everywhere. Lost hearing. My head was spinning. My number two came out of nowhere, grabbed me by the handle of my plate carrier, dragged me into a ditch. My 22-year-old medic at the time, who had a torn MCL, PCL, saved my life because he applied a tourniquet. My translator helped him and helped save my life. And so it was probably one of the most difficult moments of my life personally on a physical sense. But what made it worse is that when I came to my senses, a couple minutes into it, my number two came to me and said, hey, just want to give you a SIP rep. I asked him, what's the status of Mountain Warrior 6, which was a colonel? He said, Mountain Warrior 6 is okay. What's the status of Mountain Warrior 7, which is a Command Sergeant Major? He said, we lost Command Sergeant Griffin, and we lost 3 others. And I said, get me out of this hole. And they picked me up, and I'm hopping on one leg. And I saw Command Sergeant Major Griffin, Major Gray, Major Kennedy, and then USAID at the time, Regi Abdel Fattah, were all killed by the same bomber that didn't kill me. A few minutes later, I was put into a vehicle on top of ammo cans, and I was casevaced to nearest military hospital where my war ended. So I received the Medal of Honor in November 12, 2015 from President Obama for actions on. And I tell people there was no heroic act that day. It was just, literally, it was my entire team did their job, and unfortunately we still lost Americans. The fact that I was recognized as a hero for that was a really tough pill to swallow. It was really a tough one for me to swallow to this day. But I've also understood that this is an opportunity for me to have a platform, to continue serving, to say the names of my friends who didn't come home, highlight the true heroes of my personal story, and also just to remind people that everything that we have in this nation is because of men and women who put their lives on the line and didn't come home, and their families have to live with the consequences of that. Yeah, we are the greatest nation in the world, hands down, without a doubt. That's because we bleed for it, and that's because we have individuals who put on that uniform and are willing to deploy thousands of miles away, years at a time, to make sure that we get to keep this way of life. And I don't take that for granted.
In reading about your case, I understand there was a second suicide bomber who was, basically also going to detonate, but because of your action, they were kind of, prevented from that detonation actually having any impact on the two.
Correct. So I did not know this, but there was a second one. He was still in the building. What we understand based upon forensics and the storyline is that because we got there so quick on the first one, it prevented the second one from actually exiting. So their goal was boom, boom. He gets in the middle of it, detonates, second one finishes the job. But because we got there so quick, and because I got to throw him so quick, the first one detonated, and the second was still in the building, and so the first bomb caused him to detonate, probably shocked him, and so he detonated inside the building. But I thought for a long time that the second bomber was the bomber that killed Commander Sergeant Griffin, Major Graham, Major Kennedy, and Reggie Abdel Fattah. It wasn't until I actually read the report, maybe a year later. Actually, it was after Sergeant Mahoney received a Silver Star, my teammate, that I realized, hold on, you're telling me that the guy that blew up on my feet is the one that killed my friends 30 feet away? And then I really threw me for a twist. Because you start replaying the scenario over and over again, you start thinking, how? Like how? Why am I here? How did I live? And then one day you start to realize, stop asking those questions. One day you'll figure it out. You'll meet the maker, and someone, and you'll get your answers, hopefully. In the meantime, do something about it. Be a better person. Serve your community. Honor those guys that didn't come home. Do your job as a father. Do your job as a husband. And that mindset sort of gets you back on track, if that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. Was there a moment when you realized that this could be the end, and you still chose to act? I guess that's what I'm curious about.
I get this question all the time, like, weren't you scared? How'd you react this way? Don't you know you're gonna die? You don't think that way. And not in combat. I call it the power of love. You love your brothers and sisters so much that you're willing to do the impossible for them. And you're willing to die day in, day out, night in, night out for them. That this whole concept of dying, even though it is always in the back of your head, it is shelved because the concept of protecting them becomes the priority. So for me, I didn't go into this situation doing a calculation of like, okay, here we go. Probably gonna die right now. I went in with, he's going to kill my friends. And my job is to protect them. Literally my job that tour was to protect Command Sergeant Griffin and at the time Colonel Mingus. And so if I died and they lived, then that's my job. Yeah, it's not a great way of putting it, but that was the reality. And so I'm already designed that way. And as a warrior, you then have to trust your instincts, your training, and then your love of brotherhood and sisterhood, and then you just allow it to just develop. And so I'm blessed that I've been in combat before. I'm blessed that I was serving alongside some fine people. I'm also blessed that I had really good training, and that allowed me to make a decision. And then the last piece is the piece that we all wonder, who am I in that moment? I don't know. You think if you would have asked me, would you bum rush or suicide bomber before that, I'd probably say, I don't know about that one. That sounds a little stupid. When the situation happened, you have to do your job. I just did my job. And Mahoney followed me right into it. It just tells me I'm not the only one. And I tell people, like, you guys don't understand. Like, when you're in the moments in combat, I've seen so many heroic acts. We're all ordinary individuals. But we become something special to each other in those moments, because you'll see people running to burning buildings or vehicles, middle of an open ground to go pick up their friends and put them on their shoulders and run them while being hit. Story of Sal Junta, when he was in a Korangal, seeing his buddy dragged, running across enemy line, taking out the enemy, picking up his buddy, putting him on his shoulders and running back through enemy lines, things like that. But you think, wow, how would you ever do this? That's simple to us. It's our job. And we love each other enough that if we're going to die trying, that's our duty. And I think that's what makes the professional so different and special. The only one I can think of that comes as close to it, it's still different, is firefighters. I have so much respect. The idea of just running into a burning building day in, day out, night in, night out to go save complete strangers or your friends, it's unbelievable.
As I listen to you speak about this, I can't help but wonder if, at least at some maybe lesser level, you're seeing or hoping the same exists in America writ large, among Americans, despite this increased polarization that we absolutely see, and is, in some cases is being, fueled by nefarious parties.
Listen, I believe that if we spend a little bit more time willing to actually have a conversation with people who differ in ideas from us, that we will go a lot further than we possibly could ever imagine in terms of bridging that gap. I ask questions to my family and my friends. I didn't live in the 60s and 70s. I've watched a lot of reports, I've seen movies, you read books, you learn about it in history, and it sounds like those days were pretty tough too. We had a very unpopular war, we had a hippie movement, we had a lot of racism in this country, we had an impeachment, and a president, we had the Cold War. We have a lot, we have a lot of issues, a lot of changes in our society. We're technologically growing. I wonder, and I asked these questions. I said, did you guys think it was the end of the world at that moment? The way we think about it today? So I look at those moments and I look at the concept of this nation. And one of the beauties to me is the idea of freedom of speech. Because freedom of speech doesn't mean that we're all going to have great conversations with each other and listen to each other. Freedom of speech means that we're going to very much disagree, and at times it's going to be very nefarious as well. And that's going to create this concept or this idea, specifically to our enemies, that we don't like each other very much, that we are a country that is on the brink of civil war. No, we are a country that is utilizing our God-given rights and our constitutional rights to disagree. Sometimes we take it too far. We are taking it too far right now, 100%. But to me, that's human nature. It's a cycle. I hope that we find a way over the next couple of years to say, okay, this is a little bit too much. I really want to better understand why you're thinking that way, and maybe we find a little bit of common ground.
So this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Any final thoughts as we finish?
I'm an optimist, right? I'm not looking to go pick fights with anybody around the world. I'm looking to, bridge gaps and heal. That's what I want. I've done enough fighting, too much in my life, and so. But in this country right now, I'm excited to be a part of this. What I see as the bridging that gap, and I'm going to make a commitment for as long as it takes to be that individual that's in the middle, trying to listen to everybody and bring everybody together. Because that to me is too important. There's no way you're going to sell me on picking one side, because it doesn't make sense. And I think we're going to be just fine. This is not the end, folks. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and appreciate what we have, to remind ourselves of how hard it is, how hard we've worked to be where we are and who we are, and that we got to continue earning it every day. It's not free.
Well, Florent Groberg, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining Florent Groberg and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.